Hey, Jay Carper here from American Torah, and I'm reading from Genesis chapter 18, verses 1 through 8, and these are the first few verses of the Torah portion known as Vayera. Then Yahweh appeared to him by the terebinth trees of Mamre as he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. Abraham, right? So he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing by him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them, and bowed himself to the ground, and said, My Lord, if I have now found favor in your sight, do not pass on by your servant. Please let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree, and I will bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh your hearts. After that you may pass by, inasmuch as you have come to your servant. They said, Do as you have said. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, Quickly, make ready 3 measures of fine meal, knead it and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd, took a tender and good calf, gave it to a young man, and he hastened to prepare it. So he took butter and milk and the calf which he had prepared, and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree as they ate. Now, we know from the rest of Scripture that Abraham is the exemplar of faith in God. I think it's the book of Hebrews that says that, Abraham believed and his faith was counted as righteousness. He's called the friend of God, and he is the very basis of God's greatest covenants. The reason that he was faithful to Israel is because he remembered his covenant with Abraham. In all of this, all of the blessings and the promises that God gave to Israel were based on the character of Abraham. It wasn't because Israel was so great or so amazing. In fact, they were kind of pathetic in the wilderness. They had God right there in the camp and still kept doubting. It wasn't because of their righteousness, but because of Abraham's, that God made promises and kept those promises with Israel, and will continue to keep them in the future. So I think it's really important that we understand the character of Abraham so that we can know what God values. And we can learn a lot about Abraham from just these 8 verses. So let's take it from the very beginning. It starts out with the 3 men approaching Abraham. It's a hot summer day. In the heat of the day, Abraham is resting in the doorway to the tent. This is so that he can have shade, but also so that he can get a breeze. Inside the tent, it's shady, but there's no wind blowing. It's just too hot. So he's sitting in the door of his tent, watching for visitors. And when he sees these 3 men, he runs to them. He bows himself to the ground, and he begs them to come and stay with him to get some rest and refreshment. So the first character trait that we see of Abraham is hospitality. He is eager to entertain strangers. He doesn't know anything about these 3 men. He doesn't know their God. He just thinks they're 3 men. So he's excited. He wants to entertain strangers. So there's number 1. He's hospitable. Second, he prepares 3 measures of flour, or he has Sarah prepare 3 measures of flour. Now the word for measures is seahs, if I'm pronouncing that right. And this isn't just, like a cup of flour. This is like almost 2 gallons of flour per person. This is an enormous amount of flour. Not only that, but he takes a young calf, probably 6 months or less, and slaughters it for the sake of these 3 strangers. He's throwing a feast, enough for 50 to 100 men, just for 3 people. This is a lot of food. Clearly, they can't eat all this. I imagine that Abraham is either hoping that they're going to stay with him for many days, or else he's throwing a great feast for his whole household with these 3 as the guests of honor. But no matter which way you look at it, Abraham is being extraordinarily generous. It's possible even that he meant to send them on their way with all of the leftovers, so to make sure that they would have plenty on their journey when they're not even in his company. So the second character trait is generosity. Next, we can see that Abraham really isn't a respecter of persons. These three men, they're not with a retinue. They don't have any animals. They're just walking on a dirt road. So they wouldn't be wealthy men. He's not looking for favor. And when he prepares the meal for them, he prepares 3 measures of flour. That's 1 for each. Now, of course, each man is not going to eat 2 gallons of flour's worth of bread. The point there is that he doesn't single one of them out as more important than the others. He doesn't identify the leader and prepare, 2 measures for that one and 1 for each of the others. They each get 1 measure. So the third character trait is that Abraham is not a respecter of persons. Next, when he meets these 3 men, he bows himself to the ground. He calls them Lord, in Hebrew, Adonai. He begs them to come and, eat some of his food, keep him company for a little while. And then while they're eating, he stands there and waits on them. He's probably refilling their cup, refilling their plates as they needed. So Abraham is being a servant. So the fourth character trait is that Abraham, is humble. Next, Abraham is also a patriarch. He doesn't do all of this himself because that's not really practical. His guests would be sitting around all day just waiting for him. He sends Sarah to prepare the bread. He takes an active role in preparing the calf, selects it, but then he delegates that task to one of his servants. And then he spends time with his guests. He actually does the serving. So Abraham expects his household to be as generous with their time and resources as he is. And when he tells them to do something for total strangers, they don't question him. They just do it. So he is a leader in his household, and a leader such that his servants and his family don't question him, but they follow his lead. He's an example for them. So the fifth character trait of Abraham is that he is a patriarch, a good leader in his household. I think, all throughout Scripture, God says, watch out for and provide for the widows, the orphans, the sojourners. Sojourners are people who are away from their homes. And that's exactly what Abraham is doing here. He's providing some security and some rest for these strangers. God says, he tells Israel, watch out for the sojourner, take care of them because you were a sojourner in Egypt. So this is something that God really values. We can tell in the stories of Abraham and Rebecca and Rachel, and even Joseph, that God really values generosity because all of these people have those character traits and God seems to reward them for it. He certainly expresses his approval. And we know beyond any doubt from, especially the Sermon on the Mount and many other places that God values humility. And he also values a humble servant leadership, men who aren't afraid to take charge and make hard decisions, but don't put themselves first, who understand that their place of leadership is for the benefit of the people that he's leading and for the benefit of God's kingdom as a whole, not so that he can use their labor or use their resources for his own pleasure and benefit. So 5 character traits: hospitality, generosity, fairness, for lack of a better word, not being a respecter of persons, humility, and leadership. These are 5 qualities that God values in his people. This is Jay Carper from American Torah. Be blessed.